Hey team, this video is going to just be an overview of log homes. It's going to cover some of the main items that pop up on home inspections. We're not going to dive super deep into all the different log types and cut styles and all the different construction methods of log homes because they do have their entirely different way of building and all sorts of different terms for all the different log styles and all that, and you can really get into the weeds pretty far and all that, and the more you know the better. But the goal of this video is to just give you some basic information when looking at log homes. So we'll go over some of the common defects, some of the main areas to look out for, and we'll go over a little case study on an inspection we did on a log home several years ago where we got some feedback from a client and contractor on. So here we go. These are a few of the real basic terms that are helpful to know with log homes. Chinking, that first one, is basically the sealant that goes in between the logs. It runs horizontally in between all the seams of the logs. And then backer rod, we'll pretty much probably never see backer rod, especially if the home's in reasonable condition. But the backer rod basically goes in between the joint of the logs horizontally where they come together, and then the chinking goes on top of the backer rod. So if the logs and chinking are in pretty good shape, you'll probably never see the backer rod. But it's good to know that they usually have a little bit of, it's usually like a little piece of foam tubing almost that goes between the logs, and it helps kind of seal up the gap a little better and helps the chinking adhere better to that area. If you ever see something poking out between the chinking that looks like a foamy material, it's just good to know that you're probably looking at the backer rod. And then checking is a term that we see a lot, looking at decks or any exposed larger beams or posts around a home. The main thing we'll talk about with checking is and with log homes is paying attention to what direction the checking is oriented towards. If it's facing like horizontal or up, then we got to think like a raindrop and be a little bit aware that it might be a spot where water can sit. And then sill logs is basically just the bottom run of logs. Similar to in stick-built construction, we have a sill plate. The sill log is just the bottom log, essentially. So the photo on the left is more of a caulking for log homes. You can see it's kind of like a synthetic material, and it's running vertically. Now you will still see the similar type of material running horizontally as checking. But the unique thing with the right photo is that it is an older style of chinking, and it's more of a mortar-based chinking. And nowadays, they pretty much don't, mortar's basically obsolete nowadays because obviously it's more brittle and more prone to cracking and falling out and all of that sort of thing. So the home on the right is a photo from an inspection that we actually have coming up soon as at the recording of this video. And that home we were made aware by the client that it has mortar chinking, and most of your log contractors would pretty much recommend replacing that stuff, or whenever it starts to have issues, then you're going to want to replace it. So kind of the rule of thumb is if more than 30 or so percent of the chinking is crumbling or having issues, then usually they'll just recommend redoing all the chinking versus just doing spots and little pieces here and there. But main thing is to be aware of that the newer chinking is usually more of a synthetic based, kind of like basically a caulk, and it tends to flex a bit more and do a little bit better, lasts a little longer. The mortar stuff is a little more brittle and prone to deterioration. So similar with any of the stick built homes we inspect, earth to wood clearance is is always a thing, but it's even more so important with log homes because since you have all that exposed wood, like wood destroying organisms, carpenter ants and termites and all of that are even more of a concern with log homes. And also, like we say there, rot, and rot. Those are like the three main biggest issues with logs. Uh, and if the just like with any sort of wood, if the wood's down close to the soil, we've got a much bigger chance of rot showing up. Um, the other thing there is the sealant. We got to keep an eye on the chinking and all the any penetration areas to make sure the sealant's in good shape, and also when properly maintained, the logs should be restained every handful of years or so to keep the wood in good condition. And then upward facing checking any spots where water is going to be likely to get trapped. We have to pay real close attention to those areas, looking for rot and water damage. So the very far left photo there, where there's the hand in the photo, this is actually the hand's pointing to the really tiny little crack in the foundation. But this is a good example of actually a pretty good setup for looking at the lower level of the logs. You can see there they actually have a little bit of pressure treated wood at the top of the foundation, and then it transitions from that pressure treated wood up into the log structure. And that's a pretty good setup. The rule of thumb is they like to see 12 inches or more is kind of the preferred clearance between logs and any of the soil. In the real world, if we're that one looks like there's probably 6 or so inches of clearance, but most of the time that's not going to be a inspection deficiency as long as it's not real close to the dirt. This would be an area where people just want to stay up on maintenance and make sure that the soil and landscaping materials not getting piled up on the wood. Now the middle photo here is a reminder to stay really vigilant around the exposed log ends. Anywhere where water is likely to sit on top of it, it's much more prone to rotting out, of course. And the beam or the log ends are no exception. That's 9 times out of 10 where we tend to find rot present on the logs. And since it's an end exposed beam there, if it goes back into the wall structure at all, then the repairs can start to get pretty extensive pretty quickly and pretty pricey pretty quickly. So as far as doing the inspection, we really have to pay close attention to those spots, of course. And then when we're talking with clients, we just want to reiterate that keeping those, especially the top sides of those exposed logs and the end cuts of those exposed logs sealed properly is very important. And then the photo there with the looking at the roof, just like with any other home, roof to wall junctions are a likely spot to look for deficiencies. So we have to, again, be thinking like a raindrop. Kick out flashing is really important there. It can be a little tricky for them to get the proper like step flashing and counter flashing there going between the logs and the roof structure. So we just want to look at how it's all put together and make sure it looks like it's going to shed water off properly. Because again, these log repairs can get pretty extensive pretty quickly. So this is an actual home that we inspected a few years ago. I believe we inspected it in 2018. So it was about 23 years old at the time of inspection. So not extremely old, but definitely not new. And it had pretty normal to above average deferred maintenance. It looked like it'd been a while since the logs had been restained, and we came across some rot on some of the wall sections. I'll have some photos of examples of that in the slides to come. But basically, this case study is going to go over where some of that damage was found and about how much the repair bids were for that type of work. So on this same home, these next few slides are all going to be from that same home. We found some rot around the door going out into a deck, and any wall penetrations are spots where we have to be on high alert for. So this place was no exception. There's a decent amount of rot found at the sliding glass door there. We also have to be really paying attention to how roof structures and decks are sloped by the logs. Just really making sure that they're shedding water away from the home, and ideally they'd be sealed up there between the deck and the logs. So this one had some rot around those doors. There was some rot on the exposed log ends, and then one wall corner specifically had some rot. That middle photo there is kind of pointing to that section. And then the photo with the arrow pointing towards it showed that there was some rotted, exposed log ends coming out from some upper sections. So on this one, we actually got some feedback from the client on what their bids were from a log contractor on the back end. It's good to know that you're not going to just have your run-of-the-mill handyman or contractor do log repairs, especially if it's extensive. If it's just maybe a little bit of rot on a log end, you might get by with like cutting it off and sealing it. But if it goes into the wall structure at all, they pretty much have to start getting some specialist contractors to do those repairs properly. And I was a little surprised at the number that came back for replacing that rot. This price, it was in 2018 dollars. So at the time of recording, it's 2022, and inflation has definitely brought the numbers up quite a lot further. But client told us that it was the bids they got were between $30,000 and $40,000 for some of the log repairs to be done, or the primary log repairs to be done. Now, I didn't have the bid in front of me, so I don't know if that included re-chinking the house and resealing everything, but the main stuff that he was for sure talking about and concerned with was the rotted areas. So the main takeaway from this video is that log repairs can get pretty pricey pretty quickly. So along with the costly repairs, they also take quite a bit of maintenance. So if you're looking at buying a log home, or if you're working with a client who's considering buying a log home, you have to be aware that in order to hold up well, they need to be resealed pretty regularly, at least every 3 to 5 years, ideally, having somebody come out and reseal all the logs with a approved sealant. And then along with that, they're going to have to be re-chinking in between the logs and sealing any big gaps where water might get in. The consequences of deferred maintenance can be really huge, really big, really quickly. Also, even more so than on normal homes, paying attention to gutters and downspouts and all the drainage and all of that stuff is also more important, because the rot can get so expensive relatively quickly. Those are basically some of the main takeaways for looking at a log home. Thank you.